Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Leon Weinstein, and we are at the Theme 2, Session 7 of the Roadmap to Freedom project. We will talk about something strange, absolute good. In science, we have no room for synonyms. If you have a science, you cannot afford changing definitions. You cannot afford duality, ambiguity. The definition, to be a useful one, must be one, single, unique, no other, just one single, lone, precise meaning. That's what a definition in science should be. In addition, of course, the definition should be observationally true or fit reality. Now, as I promised you, I'm coming to a discussion about absolute morality. Even more than that, I will discuss absolute rightness. Absolute rightness as a total concept applied to volition. However, in order to do that, I want to reiterate the concept of property that we already mentioned a number of times. The entire science of volition is structured upon one single definition. This definition of property. Property is the individual volitional being's life and all non-procreative derivatives thereof. You might take note of the fact that it is not a definition of property that you will find in a dictionary. You look up property in any unbridged dictionary, you will not find this definition. Historically, we have failed to identify the exact nature of property. We've failed to precisely answer the question, what is property? But individual volitional beings generate property. This is what we do. Thoughts and things. Property is a product of individual volitional action. Individuals take action that bring property into existence. Plus, ourselves are our own property, life itself and derivatives. Property, your property, is simply any derivative of life, excluding your children. Life itself, called primordial property, the biological derivative of life. Who is the owner of your life? Your primordial property. You are. If you do not own your life, then who does? If someone other than you is the owner of your life, we have a name for that. It's called slavery. The first derivative of your life are actions, thoughts, beliefs, ideas, innovations. We call them primary property and the intangible derivatives of life. The second derivative of life, the tangible derivatives, can be food, clothing, hammers, automobiles, pop-up toasters. It's important to emphasize, when I say property, I mean more than just those tangibles, because if every time I use the term property, many of you see tables, hammers, automobiles, hair dryers, diamond rings, yachts. If every time I say property you think tangible, you will miss the entire point of this course. Building upon the definition of property, I gave you a definition of stealing, taking of a man's property without his permission. The definition of stealing depends upon the prior definition of property, of course. The only thing that it's possible to steal is property. What else? What else can we steal? If a thief steals your automobile, he now enjoys the benefits of your auto. Not you enjoy it. You work to earn the amount needed to buy this auto, but someone else got the results of your labor without your permission. You now are non-voluntarily serving the thief. Non-voluntarily serving the thief. Therefore, you are involuntarily serving the thief. And so, the theft of any property always places the victim into a state of involuntary servitude. Therefore, all thieves are enslavers. Earlier, I gave you illustrations of this. Take chemist, who his formula was stolen without his permission. It's sold to a textile firm for $1 million. Even though the chemist doesn't have a chain around his neck, he is in a state of involuntary servitude. His ideas are being used without his permission. That's this bribery property. And he is just as much a slave as if he were in a prison. I gave you the definition of slavery, the control of the individual's property without his permission. From that, we will move to morality. Absolute morality, a major subject, a seemingly impossible subject to derive on any rational basis. How can you determine if a man's actions are moral on an absolute basis? What does moral versus immoral means? Some volitional actions are moral, some are immoral. The question is, how can we make a distinction between the two with precision? Can you identify absolute morality versus relative morality? Now, relative morality is also an interesting concept. Now, one of the immediate problems we encounter in dealing with this question, at least on a scientific basis, involves the conflict that arises between individuals over what is good. For example, what is a good action? What an individual calls good is relative to his frame of reference. Good is whatever an individual voluntarily chooses or prefers. Let's say you own a farm. Your farmhouse and barn were built by your great-grandfather, but it's now going to be demolished without your permission in order to build a road right through the barn and the house. You obviously call it bad. The people demolishing your house without your permission call this good. They might even say, as the bulldozer smashes through your house, this is the interest of the progress. This is in the interest of progress. We have a problem, don't you see? If everyone's concept of good is relative and frequently in conflict, then how can we effectively deal with this conflict? How can we resolve this conflict? How can we resolve disputes over which is good without violence? Because history says we usually employ violence to resolve. If we cannot avoid it, the species will perish. That's why we have to learn how to do this. The solution to this problem has got something to do with development of seemingly impossible concept called absolute morality. And to prepare the way for the solution, I will give you a new definition. It will be the definition of coercion. Coercion is any attempted and intentional interference with property. Coercion is any attempted and intentional interference with property. Now, this definition of coercion I've given you is not a relative definition, but rather it's an absolute definition. Whenever you have any volitional being interfering with the property of another, when it's intentional interference with property, you have coercion. It doesn't matter whether the person doing the coercion is one age or another age, one sex or another, where they went to school or totally irrelevant. It's still coercion. Now I'll give you a very important definition that will enable us ultimately bridge this gap between the physical sciences and the so-called social sciences. It's the definition of absolute good. Anything is an absolute good that it's a relative good to at least one person, but does not involve the exercise of coercion upon another. I think you understand it. Or you could call that absolutely good action. It's good for you and not bad for others. Now let's see if we can test certain actions to determine if those actions are absolutely good or only relatively good. Let's say a man is loafing on the beach. All right, watching the sunset. Is that an absolute good or a relative good? Well, it's good. However, we don't quite have enough information yet. What is the critical question that must be answered in order to determine if his actions of loafing on the beach watching a sunset is absolutely good or relatively good? What must we know? Very simple. Whose beach is it? Is that a critical question? Indeed, because if this fellow, maybe he jumped right over the fence, right over the no trespassing sign, he's on your beach without your permission. Trespassing involves coercion, and so his actions are relatively good, but not absolutely good by definition. On the other hand, if it's, let's say, his beach, fine. If it's your beach and he is there with your permission, that's fine. It would be an absolute good. Let me stop here. We will continue this discussion at the next session. Meantime, think about two relatively good and two absolutely good actions. Think and write them in the comments. Until next time.